who are coming in. I pray, dear God, that you would bless us. We're so thankful for Mike and Troy, our special guests today, and we pray that you'd bless them. We know that they travel all across the country in churches just like ours, meeting folks just like us. And what they do is ministry. It's real ministry, because we know that your word tells us that we need to be prepared. Your word tells us that we need to follow biblical principles when it comes to how we handle our money and our investments and all of that, and what's going to happen when we're gone, and all the planning. And none of us like to think about those things, but they're coming. And the good Christian, the good believer, is prepared in everything in life. So I pray that you'd bless them as they come to speak to us. And I pray, dear God, that we would just see the truth in what they're going to share with us, biblical truth and practical truth that can help us and benefit our families for years to come. Be with us now in this hour in Jesus' name. Amen. I just want to introduce them quickly to you because I want to give them as much time as we can. And by the way, Brother Troy will be sharing his testimony in the service to follow just before I preach. And then, of course, this afternoon at 2 o'clock, we'll give you time to get out of here and go have lunch, and then come back at 2 o'clock, a question and answer session. And one more thing, let me go ahead and share with you. I've shared the last couple of weeks. The church isn't getting anything for this. I don't get anything for this. Lori and I took advantage of this offer some 7 years ago. We have a trust with the foundation, and it's been one of the greatest decisions we've made since we've been married all these years. And there's a real peace of mind that comes with decisions like this. But there are no kickbacks here. I don't get anything. The church doesn't get anything. We offer this as a ministry and as a service because it's part of our denominational leadership, and I'm thankful for that. It's great to have Mike Wootton. Mike is the president of Cornerstone Estate Planning, and Brother Troy Sadowski is the vice president. And they partner with Free Will Baptist Foundation to do exactly what they're going to be describing to you today. And so I'm excited to have them. And I don't know what the order is. Brother Mike, you're going to speak first, I guess, or there's Brother Troy right there. I thought you slipped out for a second, Brother Troy. I said, somebody go get Brother Troy. He's the big guy outside. He hides a lot. I'm sure he does. Big guy, old guy. There it is. By the way, these guys are great. I mean, it's just been great to spend time with them. I'm going to turn things over to them and give them as much time. Would you please give a Crossroads warm welcome to Brother Troy, Brother Mike. Come on up. And each of you have a mic, okay? Brother Troy.
You can come up too,
Brother Troy, come on up. I've got a mic for you too, so come on up here, sir.
We're going to sit down because I'm the old guy. When people call the office, Troy and I will be out speaking, and they'll go, I'm not sure which one of them was at mine. And our office says, is it the old guy or the big guy? And that's how we're identified. My name is Mike Wootton. As Pastor said, I'm the president of Cornerstone. Troy and I have worked together for many, many years. Even before we started working with the Free Will Baptist Foundation, we had done this planning for years and years and years. And let me just start with, how many of you think it's a good idea that we keep the government out of our personal family business? Okay, so that's usually unanimous. Although one time we did have an IRS agent in there, and she was like, no, I think we should do this. We like to have fun when we're teaching this kind of stuff. So if you want to interrupt us and you want to ask a question, by all means do. Our goal here today is we want everybody to come back at 2 o'clock because we're going to talk about we're going to kind of delve deeper in how all of this stuff kind of works in the state of Oklahoma. And so today we're going to talk about a few things biblically that we need to talk about. And it's funny, when I'm in a church like this, I was at the Shallowford Free Will Baptist Church in Georgia. And my son, I've got 4 kids, but we only had my son at the time, and he was younger. He was probably 3 or 4 years old. And we didn't have as nice of a church as y'all have with double doors there. We had like a single one going down this way. And the pastor was going on a little bit long. And I know Pastor Doug never goes on long for sure. But this pastor was, and my son was getting antsy. And my wife gave me the evil eye, and she said, you need to do something with this spawn of yours. And so I pick him up, just to show you your kids are listening, and I take him out the middle aisle, and right as I hit the doors, my 4-year-old son yells out, pray for me, pray for me. So your kids know what's going on when they're in here. So we're grateful to be in Oklahoma. We're at the state business meeting. Does everybody have one of the brochures? All right, you go ahead and chat for a minute.
I won't start out with any fancy themes or hand out any fancy brochures or any fancy PowerPoints. There won't be any shameless plugs for the University of Georgia. A lot of times, some people want to, input their college of preference in there. But when you have won back-to-back national championships, there's no need to do that. So you won't have to worry about that. But I will.
You just lost half the crowd.
But I will represent my school. I love what I do. I get the opportunity to travel around and share my testimony. I get to travel around and help families. And that's what this ministry is all about. It's about helping families. My wife and I have been going back and forth from Georgia to South Carolina because her brother died in a car accident about 2 years ago. And last November, her mom passed, and her dad just passed about a month ago. So we are entrenched in what we're going to delve into here and what we're going to talk about. It's not pleasant topics sometimes. I mean, nobody wants to talk about death or incapacitation, but let me tell you, it is necessary that we sit down and we talk about it, and that you truly consider putting a plan together for your family. My in-laws had what we're going to be talking about, and it has made things so much easier for my wife. She has every bit of paperwork that proves to the world that she's the one that handles everything when it comes to their estate. And I know some people, an estate. What is an estate? Help me out. When you hear the word estate, what's the first thing that pops in your mind?
It's okay to talk.
Dead people. Okay.
That's what, we ain't never heard that one, have we?
That one. You've really thrown us for a curveball there. Dead people. Okay, that's accurate. Dead people have estates.
Gee, somebody said everything you own.
Everything that you own.
Yeah. We actually had a person one time say, everything you can't take home with you. It's like,
All that stuff in your garage. All that stuff on your property. That is your estate. That is what you've worked so hard for. Your family, the people that you love the most, making sure that they're taken care of. You might be passionate about a ministry. You might
or Star Trek.
Or Star Trek. This man over here
Me too.
has taken it to the next level. Now, I asked him if I could wear the Batman outfit, but he wouldn't let me. So we had to put that one aside, but I probably wouldn't have been able to as well as Adam West. I don't even want to go there.
So let me interrupt you for 1 second. Let me say a couple of things. And the state of Oklahoma, how many of you are from Oklahoma? Okay, a large majority. All right. So the state of Oklahoma says you have to have a death document in place. All right. And it basically you have 3 choices on how that can occur. Number 1 is you can do nothing. How many of you in here tend to procrastinate? Any procrastinators? Some of you are going to put your hand up later. That's what's going to happen. So we had a shirt made up that said, "Procrastinators of the world unite tomorrow." Okay. So how many of you know who Dave Ramsey is? Okay, Dave Ramsey says that 65% of Americans have nothing in place to protect their families when they pass away. Or if they do, it's so ancient that it doesn't even apply anymore. So here's the question. Why do you think so many of us don't have anything in place to protect the people that we love the most? And there's no wrong answers, but give me an answer. Complicated. I would buy that. Actually, I really. Why else? What? Don't know where to start. Lack of knowledge. Absolutely. Yeah. What's that? It's an uncomfortable topic to talk about. All of those are true. Yes. We think we're going to live longer than we are. Troy's story right now is going through that with his. I mean, when his mother-in-law passed, none of us expected that. We expected the father-in-law to pass first, and he did. So, all of those are good answers. And here's the reality. When we don't know what to do, what do? Nothing. And if you don't have anything in place, who suffers the most? What do you think? Your family does. Yeah, your family does. So these are some things. So doing nothing is not an option. We should take that off of the table, okay? Now, the second way that you can handle your stuff or your estate, kind of an old-fashioned way, it's called a will. A will is simply a series of instructions or directives that you leave for those that are left behind. But in Oklahoma, anything that's handled via a will has got to go through a court process called what? Probate. Probate is the administration and the distribution by a judge of what your stuff is. We've actually had people come to our seminars and say, well, my lawyer told me that I have a will, I don't have to go to probate. Typically, the will's the document that inserts you or opens a probate. Does that make sense? Now, let's make one caveat. When we're talking today, we're talking predominantly about second to die, okay? So in Oklahoma, when y'all own property together, let's talk about real estate for a second, you typically own that as joint tenants with the right of survivorship. Now, sometimes it's called tenancy by the entirety, but most of the times joint tenants with the right of survivorship, which means when one person passes, you don't have to go through a lot of process because you already own it. You own it together. Okay? In law school, they call that the robin rule. You have two robins on a bench, on a limb, one robin falls over dead, the branch is owned by the remaining robin. That's joint tenancy with right of survivorship. So today we're going to be talking about the second to die, all right? That's a different story because now you're talking about a change in cost basis, a change in name, tax basis, so all of that. So when we talk today, we're talking predominantly about second to die, okay? So that will process ends up through that probate situation to run a little while. The average estate, not for super rich folks, but the average estate takes about 40 hours to accomplish from start to finish, okay, on second to die, all right? Now, do lawyers in Oklahoma expect to get paid? How much? What does a good lawyer make per hour in this part of the country? What do y'all think? 300? 500? I feel like I'm auctioning cattle. It's like, according to the national stats, it's $3.25 an hour. So you kind of hit the nail on the head. If I had something to give you, I would give that to you right now. See, I knew we messed up, Troy. So let's do some math. If you got 40 hours worth of work, let's just say you get $300 an hour. How much money did your family just give to the law firm? How much? $12,000. And at the end of the day, that money didn't go to your kids. That money didn't go to a ministry. That money went to a bunch of lawyers to give your stuff to your kids. So I'm going to let Troy do the next section, talk about the other alternative.
Well, I'm going to take a step backwards and talk about probate a little bit. I live in Cherokee County in Georgia, and I had never been to probate. I'd heard about it, And I wanted to experience it myself, and I went and I sat on the back row. And I'm sitting there the whole time, and probably 30% went through with no problems whatsoever. The other remaining things, there became a problem. All probate is the court overseeing the distribution of your assets and agreeing or disagreeing of how you're doing it. So I'm sitting on the back and I'm watching this. And then they were going to break for lunch, and the bailiff came back and said, the judge would like to see you in his chambers. And I'm like, oh, Lord, what have I done? I've just been sitting here. And I went in there, and he asked me, he says, well, what are you doing here? And I said, I'm on a fact-finding mission. This is what I do for a living, and I wanted to make sure that I could speak accurately. So I came up here myself so I could watch probate. And he said, you want me to tell you what probate is? He goes, I'll sum it up really quickly for you. It's like a potluck dinner. And he said, have you ever been to a potluck dinner? I said, yeah. He goes,
I'm a Baptist.
a free meal Baptist. I retract that statement. So, where was I?
Potluck dinner.
Potluck dinner. And he goes, ever been to potluck dinner? I said, yeah. He goes, when you get there early, you could get a steak. But as time go on, you may end up with a hot dog. And he goes, the probate system is the potluck dinner of the legal system. You're not quite sure what you're going to get until you get there. And he says, typically, the attorneys, the creditors, the debtors, they get the steak. They get the hamburger. Your family gets the hot dogs. Does that make sense? To me, it made perfect sense. And from that point on, I've never been a big favor of the legal system. Do we live in an ever-changing society? Do we live in an unsure world right now? Absolutely. I think it's more important now than ever before that we protect our family. Everything that you work so hard for and the people you love the most. That's what this is about. Helping families, helping and serving y'all. That's what we're here to do.
So let me say this. The third option that we have in this in Oklahoma is called a revocable living trust. A living trust is just a legal entity that you put together while you're alive and healthy, and you title your assets into the trust. So my wife's name is Sherry, so we have the Wootton Family Trust. So Mike and Sherry are the trustees of the trust. Our trust owns our house. Now, we're still making payments to the bank, but it's deeded to our trust, okay? Our assets, our trust owns everything. And while we're alive and healthy, there's no difference from the way we do our business as the way y'all do your business. But when we both go home to be with the Lord, all of those assets held under the umbrella or the protection of the trust flow through to our children without the need for what Troy just described as probate. How many of you think it's a blessing that you wouldn't put your kids through that nightmare? It can really be a nightmare. So, how many of y'all in here, is there anybody in here, I know Ashley and Karen have a trust with us. I know Doug and Lori have a trust. Does anybody else in here, have y'all, because Troy, you were here 7 years ago? Anybody else in here have a revocable living trust? Okay, so you've got a trust. Well then, did you do it through the foundation? You did it through the foundation? We thank you for that. We're grateful. You will talk afterwards. No, you got some good advice. Cool thing about a trust too, whether you do it in Oklahoma or Kansas or Florida, it's good wherever you're at. So that's a very cool thing. So the state says you've got these three options. Do nothing. And by the way, if you choose the do nothing option, what ends up happening is that when you die, the state of Oklahoma has statute in place that says this is how everything will be distributed, but they always do it in a will. Now, here's the question for us as brothers and sisters in Christ, we want to make sure we're all equally yoked here. If your state of Oklahoma writes your documents for you, who's going to benefit more ostensibly, your family or the state? Probably the state. So don't let them write your documents. Does that make sense? Any questions so far? Yeah.
In my family, I don't know how to feel about any of this.
Mm-hmm.
Because in my family, on 2 separate occasions, somebody remarried and became ill, and the person got power of attorney and came in and robbed the trust of everything.
There's ways to fix that, but you got to kind of, all of the ones that we do have protections in there for that. Now, once the person that was married, that came in and I'll call it the maree, if they change it, then there's some things that we can't do at that point. But that brings me up to a story. I want Troy to talk about his mom and dad's particular situation because he can relate to that. Use your microphone.
Sorry. I'm not used to people letting me speak like this. Let me even back it up a little bit further. It usually takes something happening to us before we actually go and do something. And for me, I got a hoarse voice. This was like 2005. And I went to the ear, nose, and throat doctor. He said, "Oh, you got acid reflux. Take this little pill called Nexium and come back and see me." And I did, and it progressively got worse. So he said, "You need to go to see somebody at Emory Crawford Long Hospital, Emory University in Atlanta." And I went, and they found a mass on my vocal cord, and that's what was causing the hoarseness. Well, at this point, I'm scared now, because they're telling me that it could be this, it could be that, but we need to do a biopsy. And before we did the biopsy, they took us and we met with the doctors and the administrators. And the only thing that they wanted to know was, because I was going to be put under anesthesia, who was in charge. I didn't have any paperwork that my wife could show to them that she was the person that was making decisions and handling those decisions for me. Became ultra eye-opening to me. I did not have the basic paperwork to protect my wife. Guys, I'm called to love my wife like Christ loved the church, and we all know what he did. If you do not have the proper paperwork, you need to get it. I realized I didn't have my wife protected. I knew what Mike did for a living, and I went and listened to him. And the light bulb went bing. This is exactly what I want for my family. I want my family to stay in control and everybody else keep out. I believed in it so much, I left my job, joined Mike, and we worked for another company before we started working for Cornerstone and the foundation, going around the country and doing that. That's how much I believed in it. I still believe in this today. With my in-laws passing as close as they did, my wife has never had to do anything differently. I mean, she has had complete control, complete authority. She gave the hospice people what they needed when it came to, end-of-life care and how things were supposed to be. They didn't question any of it. It made things so smooth for her. And it's really awesome because that's what we walk around and we talk to people about. And when I'm there and I see it working live, it was amazing. And that's why we do this. And it made things so much easier on my wife.
Tell them your story, because you can't control family. Tell me a story about Dad and Gail. What ended up happening there? We tried to get your dad to do this.
My dad he was Polish, and he had a thick Polish head. And you could never get through to him. And I used to sit down and talk to him, "Dad, about this is what I do." I even told him, I said, "Dad, I will pay for it for you, because us kids are going to benefit more from it." But long story short, my dad never did anything like that. What he did is he got on the internet. He pulled out a plug and play, is what I call it, will, where you just write in stuff. He did that. He went down to the Coweta County Courthouse in Georgia, and he recorded it there. And that's what we found. My dad wanted things to be done that did not get taken care of, because what happened was is he put his wife, my stepmom, Gail, on the deed. So my dad owned half, she owned half. When he passed, through joint title with right of survivorship, that his half went to her. So now she has a whole piece of the pie. She has moved back to Orangeburg, South Carolina, and everything that my dad wanted done is not going to happen. And that's a tough pill to swallow, but I helped her move. I helped her unload. I did everything because my dad asked me. Make sure, because you shake any family tree, a few nuts fall. The Sadowski family tree, you shake it, a lot of nuts fall, and they will, on the way down, they're going to try to hit you in the eye so they can do damage. And that was my brother and sister. And my dad wanted me to make sure that my brother and sister didn't get anywhere near Gail. So I did exactly what my dad wanted to do. But I knew what I was doing. I wasn't following through with his wishes. And that, to this day, really, really haunts and bothers me.
Well, and even to go backstory, and I will say this, and I'll say it in front of Troy, he's one of the godliest men that I know. He's got the biggest heart that you'll ever meet. But his mom's teacher's retirement bought that house, paid for that house. So now the stepmom ends up getting it, and Troy still helped her move out. So he's a better man than I am. But one of the things that we see in situations like this is people will try to put their kids' names on stuff they own. Like they might go, well, I'm going to put my son's name on my property. Do you think that's a good idea? Let me tell you why that's a horrible idea. First of all, when you put somebody's name on a property that you own, you just created a co-what? A co-owner, a co-ownership, which means that from a tax standpoint, you've created a big liability. The idea is if I put my son's name on my property, my wife and I die, then the basis in our property, I'm going to get a little deep into taxes right now. So let's say we gave $40,000 for our property. 20 years later, it's worth $240,000. If we go to sell that, we just had a capital gain, right? So we had a $200,000 capital gain. Is capital gains taxed? What do you think? Yeah, there's actually a tax called a capital gains tax. Well, if you put your kid's name on the property with you, you simply transfer that tax to your kids, which is, we don't want to do that, right? Or you have a liability situation. Let's say you put your child's name on a property, and that child, and I know we don't like to talk about this, but let's say that child goes through a divorce. Could your property now be in jeopardy? What do y'all think? I'll give you a case. So this happens down in Alabama. So the Alabama kind of thing.
Roll Tide.
So we're in. There's this lady. She has I think it was like $140,000 CD. That's what she has. She's a single or widow. She's a widow. She's got one son, and mom's starting to get a little feeble. Okay, so she puts her son's name on the CD with her, right? So now the son is technically what they call a co-owner, or in legal language, it's imputed to be partly his. Now, we understand as Christians what imputation is, right? That's what Jesus did for us on the cross. He imputed his righteousness to us, and then we imputed our sin nature to him. That's why Christ dying on the cross covers our sins. but it's actually an accounting term. It actually means moved from one side of the ledger to the other. Well, in the legal world, it means the same thing. So it turns out that the son's wife is divorcing the son, okay? In the discovery process, the lawyer representing said wife says, wait, your husband is a co-owner of mom's $140,000 CD. Now, was he really a co-owner? What do y'all think? No, it was mom's. She just put his name on this, right? Well, the judge determined that he did, in fact, own half of this $140,000 CD, which means that ex-wife or ex-daughter-in-law get how much? Yeah, half of this. Mom has to write a check for $35,000 to her ex-daughter-in-law. Now, I know we're all Christians, but if that had happened at your house, would that have been a problem? We're teaching this in Alabama. I was down in Mobile. Troy and I were in Mobile, Alabama. And there's this beautiful little lady in our seminar. She was probably 150 years old, maybe 4'11". And she said in her South Alabama accent, she said, well, Brother Mike, that wouldn't have been a problem if it happened in my house. I'd have just shot her.
Things work differently in Alabama.
Yeah, Troy and I are like, roll tide. But these are real everyday issues. Does that? And I know you don't think it's ever going to happen to you, but in Troy, we're in this industry, and it happened to his family. And it's not just cases of passing away. It's also in cases of incapacitation. How many of you believe you could leave church today and be in an accident and your life has changed forever like that? Listen, how many of you believe that a family member could be in a horrific accident and your life has changed forever like that? Church, it happened to me. On April 10th of 2005, my 17-year-old daughter was on a boat at Lake Allatoona, Georgia. The kid driving the boat didn't know what he was doing, and my daughter was flipped out of the front of the boat. The boat runs her over, and the propeller takes the left side of her body. Cuts her left arm off, cuts her left breast off, goes down her leg, severs her Achilles, breaks her leg. She goes into the water without a life jacket on. She's in the water for about 2 minutes before they're able to come around and get her. These are all just high school kids, last day of spring break. They managed to get her back in the boat. They call 911. EMTs meet them at the dock, start working on her. She's life-flighted from the lake to Grady Hospital in downtown Atlanta. We get a text that says, Katie's been in a boating accident, life-flighted to Grady, hurry. That's all we got. We make our way to the hospital. When we get there, they take us back, and my wife and I are on either side of her. She's in an intensive care, ventilated, unconscious. It was horrific. Her body was ravaged. And this is our baby girl. We don't know what to do. The doctors there were Emory-trained doctors and had been in Afghanistan, and they were wonderful. They prayed with us. They said, there's a whole lot of things that we need to do, but you have to sign these papers. Now, it's the first time that the legal world interfered or intruded into our nightmare. And the legal papers said that if we take her in to operate and she dies, you can't sue us. In other words, we had to indemnify the hospital, okay? Now, what would you do? You'd do the same thing we did. You'd sign the papers so she can go into surgery. She goes into surgery, and by the grace of God, she survived that surgery. She comes out. They couldn't save her arm, so she's an amputee to this day, but they saved her life. and she ended up, we were in the hospital for over a month. She had to be retrained on how to walk and this kind of stuff. But she's a trophy of grace. And when you guys come back at 2 o'clock today, I'm going to tell you the rest of the story and how God was glorified in what happened there. I urge everybody to come back at 2 o'clock. Any other questions? We've only got another 4 hours to do this. So, questions, comments, concerns. Let me give you a little history. 11 years ago, the Free Will Baptist Foundation said we need to put something in place because this happens all the time. Out in East Tennessee, Troy and I were at the Hardin Valley Free Will Baptist Church, and the pastor is a guy named Darvin Oaks. And Darvin said that we just had a situation in our church where a beautiful saint left $60,000 to the church to pave the parking lot. That's what she wanted to do. The pastor's wife, did you have a question?
What's the difference between just dating somebody and then dating somebody like a title?
So now, okay, so say that again. I'm sorry.
What's the difference between dating somebody and then dating somebody like a title?
Okay, so what the question was, what's the difference between naming somebody and then naming somebody as a title on a beneficiary? Do you understand the difference between qualified money and non-qualified money? Okay, so for everybody else, qualified money is retirement money, things like 401ks and IRAs and TSPs and that kind of stuff, right? Non-qualified money is like your checking accounts, savings accounts, stock accounts. On these, you want to name a beneficiary as somebody that would get it. Beneficiary designations bypass probate. However, the problem is that in many states, you can't do that with real estate. Sometimes you can. Sometimes they have things called ladybird deeds. Have you ever heard of ladybird deeds? And the idea of a ladybird deed is that you can pass your real estate on to your next of kin without probate. Now, not all states do that. I don't know if Oklahoma does.
No,
Missouri does, but I don't know if Oklahoma. But here's a problem. You get people that'll go, well, I just want to name somebody as on this. The court doesn't recognize that. Because what ends up happening is there's no creditor protection within that ladybird deed. So in other words, if the person that you deeded it to after death dies before you, it ends up going back to your estate. It's got to be probated. Or if that person's in a lawsuit or a divorce, let's say that your heir was in a car accident that killed somebody who's being sued, your house could be part of that lawsuit. Whereas if you do it inside of a trust, the trust can hold that until that situation's been rectified, and then everything's distributed after the situation's over. So that's the big difference. Okay, yes. Yes. We only limit it to one. No, I'm just teasing you.
Life insurance policy.
Yes.
401ks, you just said that was qualified.
Correct.
And that
Life insurance policy is slightly different, but yeah, for purposes.
specifically about life insurance policy, you list a beneficiary to them, beneficiary is the name of the trust.
Ooh.
Both spouse dies, you've got the trust set up,
Uh-huh.
it goes to the child, set goes to the church, etc.
All right.
Where does the money physically go? Life insurance company pays out,
Uh-huh.
and then it sits in the bank.
This is incredibly.
That's a great, can
Yeah,
I
go
step
ahead.
in? We have a situation, we're a blended family. I have two daughters from a previous marriage. I went through a divorce. My ex-wife has since passed away from breast cancer. So we have a situation there, or a potential situation. And what we did is we named our trust as our main beneficiary for our life insurance, and we've left instructions and directions in the trust on how we want that to be distributed. And then the successor trustee of the trust will take care of those things. Another thing, a very common thing with bank accounts are payable on death and transfer on death. But you got to take into the situation, what happens if somebody's on life support? For you to have access to those accounts requires a death certificate. If you're on life support, there is no death certificate. Your family might not have access to those types of accounts. So that was something that weighed on us very heavily, and that easy solution was to have everything go to the trust and us leave instructions and directions in there on how we want things done. Does that make sense? We also don't want to give a lump distribution to our children. We feel that estate planning is our largest act of stewardship that we're ever going to do. So what we did was we also wanted to help our kids and save them from themselves, because what does a kid usually do when he or she gets a lump sum of money? They go out and they buy something they couldn't afford before. So we didn't want that to happen. So we're going to give them over a period of 5 years. Equal amounts, we're just going to spread it out over time. We feel that that's the best way to handle that. We want to be good stewards.
Okay, I'm going to answer. Let me go on top of what you just said. So what happens, just so everybody knows, when you pass away, if you've got life insurance, you have a primary beneficiary, which is typically your spouse. The insurance company writes a check to your spouse, and they go put it in the bank account, right? Most people will do their trust as the contingent beneficiary, right? So when the second person dies in a trust, and this goes into death settlements, what happens is the Free Will Baptist Foundation sends somebody out to sit down. So let's just do this. Doug, you get to go home to be with the Lord first. We're going to come out and help Lori, okay? So Lori calls us and said, Doug's passed away. And we say, okay, and Mike comes out and sits down with her to make sure that there's somebody to help go through this process. And then we make sure that in that situation, excuse me, Doug's life insurance went to Lori, right? A few years later, Lori passes away. Well, now the trust is typically the primary beneficiary of that money, right? So we'll come back out and we'll be with their kids, and we will go to the IRS website and set up an EIN number, because their trust was done with the Social Security number, which is no longer valid. So we have to get an EIN number from the IRS, and we go down to the bank because their trust went from being revocable to irrevocable, right? So now we need to go and open a bank account as a clearing account for the irrevocable or irrevocable trust. So now we send a notice of death in to the life insurance company, and the check comes made out to the Doug and Lori trust, and that is now gone and deposited into that clearing account for distribution the way the trust said. Does that make sense? Okay. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. There would be a third bank, a new bank account set up, because your trust is in a revocable trust. Okay, you and your husband are revocable trust. When you both are dead, it becomes an irrevocable trust. We'd probably go to the same bank and we'd say, listen, we need to open up a new account, and it's called the blah, blah, blah trust. And then that all assets are sold. The money goes into that clearing account for distribution. Does that make sense? That's actually good question. Very complicated. That's like estate planning, not 101, 201. That's like 301. I mean, that's good stuff. Yes.
What happens if you're not dead and you want to buy or sell real estate or property?
You can never do it. No, I'm just teasing. Yeah. As long as you're alive, you're the trustee. you can do whatever you want. So in other words, in Troy and Beth's trust, whenever they want to buy something, you, instead of buying things as an owner, you buy things as a trustee. So like our trust owns all of our stuff. Mike and Sherry Wootton don't own anything. Our trust owns everything, but we act on behalf of our trust. And by the way, let me say this too real quick. Normally, if you were going to go out in the world and do this, you'd spend $4,000, $5,000, $6,000 to kind of put this all together. But the Free Will Baptist Foundation is subsidizing this. They're underwriting it. We got the attorneys to do it for $4,000, but the foundation is covering $1,300 of that for every Free Will Baptist family. So it brings the cost down to about $2,700 to do this whole shooting match. It's a one-time family for life. You never have to worry about it again. And they'll even finance church members into it, $100 a month, no interest. So at the end of the day, everybody can afford to do this. Does that make sense? Because it's not Troy or Mike or the pastor or the denomination. It's the state of Oklahoma going, you got to do something. So $100 a month for a couple of years to do this, if you don't want to spend the whole thing up front, it's a pretty good deal. Yes, ma'am. Yeah, inventory every lampshade and silverware. No. Actually, what happens is that we have to do that for real estate, and we got to do that for some other named things, but everything else is done by declaration. That there's a paper in there that says, hereby say all my china, my silverware, my tools, my guns, blah, 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 is hereby deemed to be in my trust. So we don't have to do that inventory. Great question. Great question. Yes, sir.
I was just going back to the EIN and all that. Mm-hmm. Is that something you can set up ahead of time?
You wouldn't want to set it up ahead of time because and I know this is a legality, but what happens is the revocable trust, okay, is done. So let me use Troy and Beth. Troy and Beth's revocable trust is done under his Social Security number, okay? When they both die, we need a number for the IRS to set up a new account. So we can open a bank account is really what happens. Because the moment that they die, that Social Security number is no longer valid. So we just, at the moment of death, or within a few days afterwards, we go to the bank, do the EIN number with the IRS online, get that number, and open the account so we can deposit. We have to close those other accounts and deposit it into this new account. No, because that's an identifying number for another entity. So we'd have to do it this way. Let me get hers and then yours.
So cars.
Mm-hmm.
Houses and those big properties obviously make sense.
Mm-hmm.
Cars. It makes sense if you've already had a car that's in your name, you trust, reading the title.
So here's the reality with cars. Cars are a depreciating asset, okay? So the rule of thumb is, we always say, ask the attorney. We have a real attorney in Tulsa that does these for our people. The rule of thumb is if the car's paid off, if you don't have a note on the car, then go ahead and title it into the trust because it's not hard to do. Just go down to DMV and do that. It'll make it easier on your heirs. If there's a note that's owed on your car, you have to think this through for a second. Let's say you've got a $40,000 note on your car, but your car at death is only worth $30,000. Nobody in your family is going to want that car that's got a $40,000 note, but with a $30,000 value. So we wouldn't want that in our trust. The family would just let that go back to the bank. That's what really happens.
I got a couple questions.
Are we charging by the number of questions?
No, but he's been waiting for.
All right.
Patiently.
You mentioned Doug and
Yeah.
And then you guys come out. So God forbid something happened to Cornerstone, does that make the trust invalid?
No, that's a great question. Think of it like a house. When the house is built, if the builder dies 2 years later, the house is still standing. And it's not Cornerstone, that's the Free Will Baptist Foundation that assumes that responsibility. So Cornerstone, we help get everything started and get it to a point where it's finished so that when Doug Little came out to your house, in effect, legally, what we did is we transferred the client. Y'all were our clients. We transferred the clients to the foundation. And now the foundation is perpetual. So whether I'm here or Troy's here or Doug's here, there'll be somebody down the road to fulfill that obligation. Good question.
The other question was, you talked about the cost. So is that a one-time cost, so I can go in and change it?
Yes.
Pay every
No, it's a one-time cost. The deal that with the foundation was there, or Cornerstone was able to do with the attorneys, is that $2,700, and 7 years ago was a little less expensive. You guys probably didn't pay that much because, we've had different costs and attorneys go up and all that kind of stuff. So the idea is it's a one-time cost, and you pay $300 down when you start, and then when your documents are delivered, the balance. You either just you're just paying us back is really what's happening. You can either pay us back all at once or $100 a month, okay? What happens is, what were we talking about? Sometimes I go to the Bahamas for like 5 seconds. Oh, the one-time cost, sorry, I know. There's no change. This is what happens when you get old, right? I am the old guy.
I blame mine on football.
Yeah, so what happens is, for the first year that you have the documents in place, there's no cost whatsoever if you change anything. After a year, changes of assets are free for life. If you buy something, sell something, there's no charge. But if you move or if you change personnel within your trust. So I know they've got 2 sons. If they disinherited one of their sons because he became a radical Islamist or whatever, and they said, we're disinheriting him, we'd have to amend the trust, and it's $50. So the attorney gets us so we'll write them in such a way that we've done almost 2,400 of these within the denomination. It's a handful of times that we've had to amend things from time to time because some people maybe move or something like that. But there's never any future cost once this is in place. Good question. Yeah.
I will say, back to Stephanie, what you were talking about buying and selling real estate. When we had our old house, that's when we got our trust. We moved to our new house. We called the attorney because our old address was in the trust. Okay, called the attorney. We changed to the new address. We took the deed documents down to the courthouse. They changed everything in there, and so now that's how it just changes as you go. You just have it changed every time.
Yeah, it's pretty easy.
It's easy, yeah.
Okay.
And you also, about
thank
the open-ended,
Who brought this up here? Wow, you move like a ninja. I didn't even see you.
he walked by you twice.
You could probably mug me and I wouldn't even know. Yeah, I went to the
He was
Bahamas.
at the Bahamas. Now, you also get a lifetime consultation with the attorneys, which means that throughout your life, if a question pops up into your head, you can call the attorney and they're not going to send you a bill. That's a beautiful thing. It's almost like having an attorney on retainer.
I know you were getting into this, and then we got into the questions. I know we only got a few minutes. What have you shared quickly when folks want to leave something to a ministry? I know in our trust, we have a portion of our trust that comes back to this church, and so a number of folks might be interested in that. Could you guys cover that pretty briefly? We've got about 4 minutes.
I will say this, our trust does the same thing, that we're biblical tithers. My wife and I just believe in that. So when we're both gone, 10% of our estate is going to Free Will Baptist Ministries to the Together Plan. And we set our kids down and we said, listen, we want to leave 10% of our estate to ministry. And our son was great. He's like, Awesome, we're going to get 90% of what we don't have now. Okay, sounds like winter. So it's real easy to do. You'll name a beneficiary, and we named the Together Plan for the Free Will Baptist. So in fact, we had dinner with Doug and Lori last night, and one of our Tennessee rep sent us a thing that a family left 90% of their estate to their local, they had no kids, they left it to their local congregation, and 10% to the state of Tennessee. It's your money, and this is what we want to end with. We want everybody to come back at 2 o'clock, because we're going to peel these layers back, and we're going to continue this discussion, and we're going to talk about you individually. It's not often that you get somebody that between Troy and I have done thousands and thousands of these estate plans, and we can answer your questions, and we'll have the right answers, that you're not paying a lawyer to do this. So you can come and talk and ask us anything. Come back at 2 o'clock, and I'm going to tell you the rest of Katie's story, and then we're going to talk about peeling these layers back so that you can do what's right for your family. You want to finish that? Wake up.
Ditto.
Thanks for letting us talk. Hope you guys learned something. Looking forward to worshiping with you.
Amen. These guys are great. I echo them. You've got to come back at 2 o'clock. This is not a hard sell. We're not trying to do anything here. We're trying to give you great information, great stewardship information about how to manage your finances and protect your family. And in closing, I will say this. Almost 20 years ago, Lori's brother died unexpectedly. He left no will. He left no anything. So we had to spend a pretty good portion to just start that process in the courts, and I know it's got to be a lot more. And I was, a number of years ago at a former church, a gentleman asked me to be a trustee of his trust, a co-trustee of his trust. He had a pretty sizable estate, and had some family situations that I won't go into. I'm so glad he did that. As a co-trustee, he left explicit instructions on where his money wanted to go. In fact, the lion's share of it went to Rogers State University, which used to be the military academy here in Oklahoma, and it changed his life. But because he had the trust, when certain individuals showed up and said, we want our share, we want our cut, where's our money, where's this, we were able to say, your father had a trust. And so I have personal experience in this outside of just our own family. So be back here at 2 o'clock. It's going to be great. You can write questions down. You'll have time to eat lunch, but we're going to start worship in 15 minutes. Go get a drink of water, go to the restrooms, and we'll see you back here in 15 minutes. God bless you. Thank you all for coming.